We just had to not like each other for a bit.
You had to not like me, which
True.
came easy.
So easy.
The Last of Us Season 2 is out. Episode 4 is the latest, and it is bombing.
People hated The Last of Us Part 2. It was massively divisive.
The Last of Us was plagued by complaints of bad casting, and The Last of Us 2 is not faring much better.
The creator of the show is finally speaking out about its failure. The Last of Us creator Craig Mazin admits Season 2 was a failure.
No one saw it coming. At least, not like this. The Last of Us wasn't just a TV show. It was a cultural event, a masterpiece that united gamers, critics, and emotional wrecks across the world. It launched Bella Ramsey into superstardom and cemented Pedro Pascal as everyone's favorite rugged protector. But the fairy tale didn't last. What started as a perfect on-screen duo slowly began unraveling behind closed doors. And when HBO pulled the plug on Season 3 without warning, fans knew something wasn't right. Now, the silence is broken. Pedro Pascal, usually tight-lipped, reserved, diplomatic, has finally spoken out. And his words? They hint at deeper wounds, behind-the-scenes chaos, and one undeniable truth. Things with Bella Ramsey went very, very wrong. What really happened between these two stars? Why did HBO quietly cancel its biggest show? And what exactly did Pedro mean when he said, "We were just on different paths"? This isn't just about a canceled show. This is about a fractured friendship, a toxic work environment, and a rising star whose attitude might have pushed too far. So, before we dive into the real madness, make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe. You don't want to miss what's coming next. The real bombshells are just getting started.
The Last of Us was plagued by complaints of bad casting, and The Last of Us 2 is not faring much better.
The finale drew over 50% less than the finale of Season 1. You lost half of your audience.
Have you changed up your impression at all, or is it pretty much the same?
Well, the noise is the same. I've not got any more noises in my back pocket. The new infected are pretty terrifying. They're so smart, and they haven't really got a noise. That's the whole point of them. They're silent and terrifying.
Ooh, give us a little silent and terrifying.
When cameras rolled, Bella Ramsey was fierce, emotional, unforgettable. But when they stopped, that's where things got messy. According to multiple insiders, it didn't take long for Bella's unfiltered personality to rub people the wrong way. She came in loud, bold, and unapologetic, which at first seemed refreshing. But quickly, crew members began whispering that Bella didn't take direction well. Some called her difficult. Others, impossible. Reports surfaced that Bella frequently clashed with writers during script readings, objecting to character arcs, dismissing emotional beats as too cliché, and even mocking proposed dialogue. One anonymous crew member claimed she refused to do multiple takes unless she believed in the scene. Another said she once stormed off set after a disagreement over Ellie's tone in a confrontation with Joel. And then came the leaks. Audio snippets where Bella can allegedly be heard laughing about fan complaints, calling them weirdos who missed their favorite straight white male. The clip spread like wildfire on Reddit, sparking outrage across both the gaming and TV fandom. Suddenly, Bella wasn't just Ellie, she was the face of controversy. At first, Pedro Pascal kept quiet. He smiled during interviews, he posed on carpets. But behind the scenes, there were signs. People close to production said Pedro had begun showing up later, keeping to himself, and requesting fewer joint scenes. He wasn't hostile, but he was tired. And everyone could feel it. For Pedro Pascal, The Last of Us was more than a paycheck. It was personal. Joel represented something real to him. A wounded protector, a reluctant father figure, a man hardened by loss. Pedro threw himself into the role, often staying in character between takes, guiding the younger cast, and even reworking certain scenes to keep Joel grounded. But as the months rolled on and the cameras kept rolling, it became clear something was off. Those close to production described Pedro as visibly worn down during Season 2. He started keeping his distance. The warm hugs and inside jokes faded. He no longer lingered on set after his scenes wrapped. Whispers grew louder that he had requested private meetings with HBO executives, not to negotiate pay, but to raise concerns. One source claimed Pedro felt the dynamic between himself and Bella had shifted from playful banter to emotional whiplash. In one incident that never made headlines, until now, Pedro reportedly refused to shoot a key confrontation scene with Bella until a new director was brought in. The original director had sided with Bella in a creative disagreement, and Pedro wasn't having it. The scene was delayed for nearly 2 weeks. HBO's budget ballooned, and tensions skyrocketed. Behind closed doors, the situation was boiling. Pedro had once defended Bella against fan trolls. Now, he was the one losing patience. When asked privately if he'd return for a 4th season, should it ever happen, Pedro's answer was chilling. Not unless things change. Drastically. His camp stayed silent publicly. But insiders say Pedro had reached a breaking point. The vibe on set had shifted from collaborative to chaotic, and it wasn't long before the cracks began to show in the final product. On red carpets, the smiles stayed frozen. The jokes felt rehearsed. Gone were the spontaneous giggles and arm-in-arm red carpet strolls. Instead, Pedro and Bella appeared like co-workers in a strained truce. Watch closely and you'll notice the awkward body language. Pedro shifting his stance, Bella glancing away mid-answer. The gaps between them in photo ops growing wider by the day. Behind the camera, there were rumors that Pedro purposely avoided Season 3 pre-production meetings. He missed early script reviews, didn't respond to scheduling emails for weeks, and skipped a planned promotional event at Comic-Con, citing personal reasons. But people inside HBO knew better. One producer was overheard saying he doesn't want to be the babysitter anymore. Fans began speculating about the tension long before any official word from HBO. Edits comparing Season 1 chemistry to the flat energy of Season 2 interviews racked up millions of views on TikTok. Comment sections exploded. What happened to them? Pedro looks checked out. Bella's ego ruined this. Through it all, Pedro stayed professional. He praised Bella's talent in interviews. He posted throwback photos with subtle captions. But nothing could disguise the growing distance. The emotional core of The Last of Us, the bond between Joel and Ellie, was quietly disintegrating behind the scenes. HBO was riding high after Season 1 of The Last of Us. Ratings were through the roof, critical acclaim poured in, and award nominations followed like clockwork. Internally, the execs were already envisioning spin-offs, crossovers, maybe even a movie trilogy. But all of that started crumbling before the first script of Season 3 was even finished. The warning signs were everywhere. Production delays, silent pushbacks, and budgets that ballooned with every passing month. At first, HBO blamed the writers' strike and scheduling conflicts. But insiders knew better. The real issue wasn't technical, it was personal. Bella Ramsey had become a lightning rod of controversy. Her interviews veered off course, her social media posts sparked rage wars, and her sarcastic TikToks mocking fan theories left HBO's PR team scrambling. Then came the final straw. A leaked scene breakdown from an early Season 3 draft revealed that Joel was supposed to appear in flashbacks, something fans begged for, but Bella reportedly mocked the plot on a live stream, calling it fan service trash. She later deleted the video, but it was too late. Producers were livid. One writer was said to be so demoralized, they quit the show entirely, leaving the writing team fractured. Behind the scenes, HBO went into damage control. Quiet calls were made, emails went unanswered. Executives who once championed Bella's boldness now questioned whether she was worth the trouble. And Pedro? He remained silent, but distant. When asked by Variety whether he was excited for Season 3, he gave a vague smile and said, "If it happens, I hope it's handled with care." Then came the official announcement, or rather, the lack of one. No grand statement, no farewell message. Just silence. The Last of Us. Season 3 was quietly shelved. Meetings were canceled, merchandise was paused, and fans were left confused and furious. HBO had just pulled the plug on their golden goose, and no one was willing to say why. But those watching closely already knew. This wasn't about ratings. This wasn't even about budgets. It was about a cast divided, a crew exhausted, and one rising star whose behavior became too big a risk for a network known for prestige and polish. Bella Ramsey was hailed as fearless, bold, a Gen Z icon unafraid to speak her mind. But over time, that confidence twisted into something else, something that alienated the very fan base she once charmed. In press interviews, she dismissed critiques with a shrug. "I'm not here to play the version of Ellie people want. I'm playing the one that matters to me," she once said. On social media, she clapped back at trolls and critics alike, lumping genuine concerns with online hate. It wasn't long before fans, especially those from the gaming world, began labeling her arrogant and out of touch. Then came the viral clip, Bella, responding to a fan's question about Joel's fate, laughed and said, "You guys are still stuck on him? Move on, babes." It was meant to be lighthearted, but it hit hard, especially coming from someone who built her career alongside Pedro Pascal. The backlash was immediate. Fans accused her of disrespecting Joel's arc, undermining Pedro's legacy, and mocking the grief that viewers felt. The tension wasn't limited to fans. Industry insiders whispered that directors found Bella difficult to direct. She questioned rewrites. She criticized lighting setups. At one point, she allegedly refused to reshoot a scene unless her creative notes were implemented. Her unfiltered persona, the one that once earned her applause, was now causing chaos on set. And through all of it, Pedro said nothing. But the absence of support spoke volumes. The same man who used to champion Bella as a brilliant young talent had stopped liking her posts, stopped mentioning her in interviews, and stopped standing beside her on carpets. It was quiet, but intentional. HBO saw the writing on the wall, and the show that was supposed to last 5 seasons came to a crashing, awkward end before season 3 ever aired. For months, Pedro Pascal stayed silent. He didn't engage in gossip, didn't fire back at the fans, and certainly didn't call out Bella Ramsey, not publicly. But in a quiet, low-key podcast episode that dropped without much promotion, Pedro finally opened up. And what he said sent shockwaves through the fandom. He never named Bella. He didn't have to. When asked about the cancellation of The Last of Us and whether he had regrets, Pedro paused, let out a sigh, and said, "Some things weren't sustainable. You do your best, but sometimes you realize you're on different paths." The tone was calm, but the subtext cut deep. This wasn't about creative direction, it was personal. He went on, saying, "There's a responsibility when you lead a show. You're representing more than just yourself. You're representing an entire team, the fans, the legacy of the source material, and not everyone gets that." That sentence alone felt like a gut punch to anyone who followed the behind-the-scenes drama. Pedro was drawing a line, and Bella was on the other side. He spoke briefly about Ellie's arc, describing it as sacred and hard to carry. Then, with a tinge of sadness, he added, "Sometimes, the weight isn't just in the character, it's in the company you keep." It was the first time fans had heard Pedro break away from the polished diplomatic image. It was honest, it was raw, and it confirmed what many had suspected all along. This wasn't a creative rift, it was a personal one. The podcast episode trended for days. Fans dissected every pause, every word. YouTube reactions exploded. Comment sections lit up with phrases like, "He's done with her," "Pedro kept it classy but told the truth," and "He finally said what we all knew." Bella never responded directly, but the timing of her next move spoke volumes. While Pedro kept his comments measured, those who worked on The Last of Us began talking, and the picture they painted was disturbing. Multiple insiders confirmed that by mid-season 2, the set environment had become tense and uncomfortable. Bella's mood swings were unpredictable. One crew member described the vibe as walking on eggshells. There were days, they said, when Bella would arrive energetic and charming, only to suddenly snap during rehearsals or challenge directors in front of everyone. One assistant recalled her throwing down a script and saying, "I'm not doing this if you're going to make Ellie a caricature." Others mentioned that Bella's team had started demanding creative control over how she was lit, styled, and even edited. Things escalated to the point where Pedro reportedly brought in members of his own security detail, not for protection, but for peace of mind. "He needed his own space," said one producer. "It wasn't hostile, it was self-preservation." He started traveling separately, leaving set immediately after wrapping and avoiding press functions unless contractually obligated. One scriptwriter was quietly removed from the team after what sources say was a heated disagreement with Bella over character development. HBO execs began reviewing footage daily, not just for quality, but to monitor morale. They'd invested hundreds of millions into this show, and now it felt like they were babysitting egos. By the final weeks of shooting, the energy was gone. Jokes stopped, conversations felt rehearsed, and when Pedro finally wrapped his last scene, he didn't stick around for the group photo. He thanked the crew quietly, hugged a few longtime staffers, and left the set without a word to Bella. If fans expected Bella Ramsey to take the high road after Pedro's subtle but stinging comments, they were in for a rude awakening. Within 48 hours of the podcast dropping, Bella posted a cryptic story on Instagram. No caption, no context, just a black screen with white text that read, "Some people smile in your face while twisting the knife. Keep that same energy." The internet exploded. Was it about Pedro? Was it about HBO? Was it her version of closure or a veiled threat? The post was deleted within hours, but the damage was already done. Screenshots spread like wildfire, with fans, reporters, and Hollywood insiders all asking the same question. Had the feud finally gone public? Bella doubled down days later with a carousel post titled "My Truth," featuring behind-the-scenes photos, a lengthy caption about misogyny in the industry, and a pointed note about how young women who speak their mind are labeled difficult, while men who stay silent get called heroes. The implication was clear, and fans were divided. Some rushed to defend her. "She's standing up for herself," they argued. Pedro was never a saint. But others weren't so forgiving. "She's playing victim after ruining the show," one comment read. "Pedro carried her for 2 seasons, and this is how she repays him?" Then came the reports that Pedro had quietly unfollowed Bella on social media. No announcement, no shade, just silence. Fans noticed immediately, and receipts popped up across Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok. The hashtags #Team Pedro and #Bella Unhinged began trending simultaneously. This wasn't just a feud, it was a full-blown fandom war. And HBO, they stayed out of it. No statements, no denials, just a quiet, calculated distance. One executive was quoted off the record saying, "We did what we had to do." It's unfortunate, but we can't build billion-dollar franchises around unstable dynamics. It wasn't long before other industry voices chimed in. A director who'd worked briefly on season 2 tweeted, "The energy on set was unforgettable in the worst way." Another commented, "Sometimes talent and temperament don't match." That's the lesson here. Bella tried to keep posting. Photo shoots, magazine covers, quirky Gen Z humor. But something had shifted. Every post now came with a wave of snarky replies. "Where's Pedro? You missed that HBO budget yet? Still blaming misogyny or ready to own your part?" The damage wasn't just public, it was professional. And her once bulletproof image was now riddled with cracks. In the weeks following the feud's explosion, it became clear. Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal were headed in completely different directions. Pedro didn't need to say much more. His work spoke for itself. While The Last of Us cancellation rocked HBO, it didn't touch his rising momentum. Within months, he was announced as a lead in Gladiator 2, cast as Mr. Fantastic in the MCU's Fantastic Four, and even landed a dark comedy series with A24. The industry saw him as steady, bankable, professional. He walked away from the wreckage untouched, elevated even. Bella, not so lucky. Suddenly her name became synonymous with drama. Casting rumors slowed. A scheduled panel at a major con was quietly scrapped. An indie film she was attached to reportedly dropped her over creative differences. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The phone wasn't ringing as often. Worse, she began trending not for new projects, but for all the wrong reasons. Clips of her weird interviews resurfaced. Fan compilations labeled her the Fall of Ellie. Reddit threads questioned whether she'd been a fluke all along. The grace that once protected her, her youth, her boldness, her authenticity, now looked like recklessness. One report claimed she auditioned for a major Netflix fantasy role, only to be passed over after an executive flagged her instability. Another insider said producers were now hesitant to hand her the keys to a franchise. She still had talent, no one questioned that. But in Hollywood, talent is never enough, especially when the people signing the checks think you're a liability. Once, they were the heart and soul of The Last of Us, the perfect on-screen duo, the emotional bond that made fans weep and critics swoon. But behind the HBO polish and awards buzz was a fractured relationship that couldn't survive the weight of fame, ego, and unchecked chaos. Pedro Pascal left with his legacy intact. Respected, quiet, professional, he'd played the long game and won. Bella Ramsey, she became the cautionary tale. A star who flew too fast, spoke too loud, and alienated the very people who once lifted her up. And The Last of Us? It went from being HBO's next great epic to a ghost, a canceled masterpiece, a relic of what could have been. The moral? In Hollywood, it's not just about talent. It's about timing, about restraint, about knowing when to fight and when to shut up and play the scene. As for Bella Ramsey, maybe there's still time for redemption. Maybe a comeback will surprise everyone. But for now, she's not Ellie anymore. She's just the girl who lost everything. And Pedro, he's not looking back. Was this feud avoidable, or was it inevitable from the start? Should Pedro have spoken up sooner? Can Bella bounce back? Or is her career stuck in quarantine like Joel in episode 1? Let us know what you think in the comments. And don't forget, Hollywood fairy tales are fragile. One bad attitude, and the whole thing burns. Like, subscribe and stay tuned, because in this business, the drama never dies.